Schizophrenia. It's one of the most severe mental illnesses, and it's most likely to strike during adolescence. Find out what you can do about it right now on Keeping Kids Healthy. Hi, I'm Dr. Winnie King, and I'm coming to you right from the lobby of the Children's Hospital at Montefiore, New York City, so you may hear some noise in the background. You know, schizophrenia, it's one of the most misunderstood mental illnesses there is. People think that it has to do with a split personality, but that's not the case at all. What it really is a brain disorder, affecting as many as one person in every 100. It distorts a person's perceptions of what's going on around them. They may see or hear things that aren't there, or believe things that aren't true. And over time, it can interfere with their ability to think clearly or to hold on to a train of thought, or even make decisions about how to organize their daily lives. It's a truly tragic disease that's made even worse by the fact that it's most likely to strike just when a child has reached his mid to late teens, or sometimes the early 20s. And when it does strike, it changes the course of his life. In a previous episode of Keeping Kids Healthy, we showed you what happens in the rarer situation when schizophrenia hits a young child. Now, in that show about a boy named Parker, his parents told us much of his story from the outside. Today we're going to meet a young man barely out of his teens who will be our tour guide from the inside. And here's his story.
I knew something wasn't right when I would be all by myself somewhere, hearing things, hearing people's voices.
This is Jasper. He's 22 years old, a former model and art student, a very soft-spoken and gentle young man. To all outward appearances, completely normal. When you meet him, you could never imagine the challenges he's been facing in his life. Not right at the beginning, of course. The early days were wonderful.
He was delightful. He was gorgeous, as he is now. He was very social, always very bright. He had an independence about him, and a very kind of sly, wry sense of humor.
But then, when he turned 15, the voices began.
Voices in my head, voices that sounded like they were coming from somewhere else, but it was hard because I couldn't really understand what they were saying. It was sort of like muffled, like if you're talking to someone and they're going through a tunnel. So it was weird. And then I would have hallucinations. I did acid while I was in college, but they were much clearer than any sort of drug high that I could have been on. I wasn't really scared by the voices. I was scared of the hallucinations that I would have, because I would sometimes see faces like in windows, and like that would freak me out. Shadows would freak me out, and so yeah, I got scared. It's pretty creepy. I would hear a conversation for as little as 30 seconds or as long as 5 minutes. Or I would see shadows passing me, or walking in front of me, or behind me. Mostly I saw myself. And for the most part, it was sort of me doing violent things, violent, destructive things. When you're hallucinating, sometimes you're in it and sometimes you're watching it. I mean, I remember hallucinating. I was sitting in a chair and I could see myself sitting in another chair, and I was facing myself. So there were two of myselves, and one of them jumped over to the other one and snapped his neck.
While Jasper suspected for years that something was not quite right, he didn't tell anyone until a year ago, when his hallucinations began happening almost daily. It was then, on a road trip to their summer house in Maine, that Jasper finally told his mother something was wrong.
we were driving along, and Jasper said, he told me that he heard voices. And I was driving. I almost drove off the road.
Jasper's parents had sensed for a while that their son was going through some inner turmoil. But like so many parents of teens, they blamed it on the changes of adolescence. They never suspected the ultimate diagnosis, schizophrenia, a physically based brain disorder that creates severe disturbances in thinking and perception, a break with reality. The diagnosis would change their lives.
The specific symptoms that characterize this break with reality are false perceptions, seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling things that aren't there. Then secondly, false thoughts or beliefs, delusions, thinking things are real that aren't real, and not being able to talk out of it or convince by reason that this is not the case. And then the third kind of positive symptom is disorganization of thinking, experiencing difficulties in normal cognitive functions, paying attention to things, being able to remember things, being able to make complex, abstract judgments about things, executive decisions about how to get through daily life.
They have hallucinations, delusions, which would be positive symptoms. They withdraw from social interaction and lose interest in activity and interacting, the so-called negative symptoms.
So, for example, loss of emotionality. Instead of being enthusiastic, excited about things, somebody is really vacant, barren of emotions, neutral. With adolescent or early adult onset schizophrenia, the tragedy in part has to do with these people who are just coming into the prime of their life, and they have their whole lives ahead of them to pursue with hopes and aspirations and dreams, as well as those of their families. And then all of a sudden they're struck down, and things may never be the same again.
The diagnosis, despite its severity, brought a strange sense of relief.
I was mostly relieved that it was, not that it was like a common illness, but that it was like a real, something that had a name to it, and people were studying it and researching it. And they had medicine to not cure it, but to, make life easier.
Fortunately, we were able to find some really great, doctors who were incredibly wonderful about helping us and listening to Jasper and being involved.
Within a year, the medication, combined with regular therapy, had made an enormous difference in Jasper's life.
For the most part, when I wake up in the morning, I don't really say to myself, this is another day where you have to deal with it and you really have to struggle. As long as I take my medicine, it's pretty much 100% that I won't have any reoccurring symptoms. Sometimes here and there I hear, little whispers, or someone calling out my name.
But there were still problems, like the stigma.
I don't tell all that many people. I'm cautious to tell other people because I don't want them to be afraid of me or feel weird around me. People saw it as such a, evil, terrible thing.
The stigma does not only affect the patient, it affects the whole family. It's important to help parents work through those issues because there's a lot of shame and embarrassment about having a child like this. It's very hard for a parent to say, my child has schizophrenia.
But with the waning of the voices in Jasper's head, there was another, more surprising response.
Once the medication started to take effect and eliminated the voices, he felt a loss to some degree. He felt that these voices that made him special, that gave him unique and creative thoughts, that helped him with his artwork, were no longer available to him.
Jasper's art, particularly his painting, helps him cope with his illness.
I did this last year, and it's rats on a train.
On the art train, no less.
On the art train, yeah. Exactly. This is a piece that I've been working on for a couple of months, just doing layer after layer.
Jasper has also made a video diary. It provides an intimate glimpse into his world and his inner struggles.
It is 1:02. I just woke up. I guess the reason I woke up now is because I have insomnia and I didn't get to sleep until around 4 o'clock. Insomnia is a big part of my life. I still can't find what I'm looking for. I'm definitely lonely. I gotta go. Damn, got to go. Two sides to every person. There's a wild side to everything. Gotta take your meds. Violent dreams for Jasper.
Shortly after this video was shot, Jasper had a relapse and was hospitalized. That's not unusual with schizophrenia.
Treatment now can control symptoms, but virtually all people, even if they're treated effectively and they recover fully, go on to have relapses. And as they have these relapses, they can't necessarily recover as well as they had the first time and return to how they were before they were ill.
But the most critical message for parents to understand is this. Patients can significantly reduce relapses by staying on their prescribed medication and by staying off illicit drugs, which many of them use to get away from their symptoms.
What makes it worse is messing around with drugs, especially marijuana.
If you experiment with drugs, if you take things like cocaine, methamphetamine, PCP, LSD, your chances of developing it with any genetic liability are much higher because this will precipitate the illness. The best chance for recovering is from your first episode. After that, all bets are off. And each time you push your luck by incurring another relapse, the likelihood of you not recovering goes up. Over time, there is a decline that becomes irreversible. Jasper's case is a good example of both the possibility but also the great challenge about schizophrenia. Here you have somebody who has had a great response to treatment, but the ability to make the most of where he is now depends on his ability to comply with the need for future treatment.
And in Jasper's case, his family will be there to help.
Everything that's happened has made me closer to my family because I saw how much they cared about me and how much they wanted to help me. So it wasn't a good thing that happened, but it was, something good did come out of it.
When you actually have the chance to see someone's story from the inside like that, it really makes it easier to understand what the disease is all about. But the terrible impact that schizophrenia has on the adolescent himself is only part of the story. As with so many illnesses, family members become victims too.
They look like a perfectly happy couple.
The kids are gonna have a feast tonight.
But the lives of Bob and Salwa bear the scars of schizophrenia. Unlike Jasper, their story of schizophrenia is told from the outside, a story of confusion and lost dreams. The story began in January 1980, when Salwa gave birth to a son. They named him Edward.
Well, I had tremendously high hopes for my son. I think it's culture, part of my culture, where men are supposed to, women achieve, but men are supposed to achieve higher up and above.
I didn't have any set highways as to what he should do or where he should go or what he would study. I wanted him just to be a healthy, normal, well-integrated, responsible person in society.
In the early years, all their dreams were fulfilled.
Well, he was so loving and warm and friendly, considerate of other people, loved his parents, loved his sister.
We used to, roughhouse like any brother and sister. We would just do silly things like trying to get out of Sunday school, unplug my parents' alarm clock because they would like to sleep late, and just what any kid does growing up.
He was a star athlete, too.
When he scored the winning goal at the end in the hockey rink, the kids just all threw themselves on him. And he was just a very, very happy little boy and very popular with his peers.
I loved to go to his games and watch him. I drove him to hockey practice and encouraged him because this was really something that increased his self-confidence.
But then the first problems appeared. It seemed like ADHD.
We're very much on top of it. We had him on medication for ADHD. He did reasonably well in school. He had therapy. But when he turned his late 13s, early 14s, something just snapped.
They didn't know it yet, but they were seeing the first signs of schizophrenia. Unlike Jasper, Ed wasn't seeing things or hearing voices, but he was having delusions. He imagined himself to be a drug kingpin with the mafia. He began drinking heavily, experimenting with and selling drugs.
It was sort of this long progression that happened over 5 or 6 years, and it got progressively worse.
But for 10 years, the experts didn't figure it out. Ed wasn't having classic symptoms like hearing voices. No one suggested schizophrenia.
We kept asking to one another, what is wrong with him? Is it something that we did? Putting blame on one another.
Ed's downward spiral continued. He was expelled from one high school he attended. Admitted to treatment facilities, he walked away. At one point, he trashed his own apartment. As his parents saw Ed's life careening out of control, the life they had dreamed for their son died.
I mourned the death of my child. All the hopes and dreams that we had for him, and the hopes and dreams that he had for himself, are gone. It's like losing a child.
It's a living death. There's no finality in it.
And still, no one suggested schizophrenia. In fact, Bob's impression of the disease remained the same as most people's.
These are people that you want to avoid. They're not people that you're afraid that they're going to knife you. They smell, and you close your eyes to these situations.
But their eyes were about to be opened. 22-year-old Edward told his parents he was leaving their suburban Boston home to live on his own.
We didn't know where he was, but we felt he was in Boston. And this was just after 9/11. And I happened to be going...
Pick up some food.
And I noticed in the hallway of a building some vagrant with huge nails and toenails that smelled, that was eating food out of a box, and that was my son.
Ed's life had hit rock bottom. He'd been living on the street for 3 months. But with a renewed effort at diagnosis, he and his family finally received an explanation for his delusions, for the disorganization in his thinking, for his loss of judgment. It was schizophrenia. Once they knew, they took the first critical step, medication, and reached out for the best care they could find.
One of the wiser things that we did was to find a third party, like a case manager, to basically be his guardian and be responsible for it.
Hey Ed, beautiful day, huh?
Keith Duclos runs a home for people with brain diseases. Edward lives there. He can talk comfortably with Keith about his disease.
I started drinking to mask the pain. You know, self-medicating.
Yeah. Now you recognize that you're self-medicating. You didn't recognize it back then, right?
Oh, I knew. I knew.
You knew that
Yeah.
that's what you're trying to do?
Uh-huh.
Edward has been sober for 3 years, and now, for the first time, he has agreed to be interviewed on television about his disease.
What did you think about schizophrenia before it came into your life? What was your impression of it?
Well, I thought it was for crazy people, you know, that talk to themselves or hear voices.
And what do you know
I
about
didn't
it?
think I was crazy, like in a schizophrenic sense.
And what do you know about it now from the way you used to think about it?
Well, I know that there's many different kinds of schizophrenia, and you know, I've had to accept the fact that that's my diagnosis.
That acceptance is hard for Edward.
Yeah, it's really unpleasing, but just gotta live with it.
How do you do that?
Well, by taking my medication, going to the doctors, putting myself in the mainstream of society, abstaining from alcohol and drugs, working, having friends, family.
Ed supports himself as the owner of a lucrative dog walking business. His sister Fiona has a family of her own, but she stays in close touch with him.
It's amazing the difference. I mean, he's completely come out of his shell and is more interactive, and he's can understand things about himself, about the world.
Can you say hi to your uncle? Hi. Hi.
I do think he gains a tremendous amount of joy out of being alive and coming as far as he has.
Ed's parents are working to raise awareness about schizophrenia, but they're also angry that it took 10 years for Ed to be diagnosed. 10 years that with earlier treatment would have left Ed's brain less damaged.
I am very angry. I have to do some work on that, and I think the work that I'm doing in trying to help other people understand and these illnesses, I think it's part of managing my anger. And I hope that in my son's, that my son's example in him coming out and talking about it will help other people.
So, what's the end of today's stories? Fortunately for both Jasper and Ed, there is hope. It comes from the families and the support systems that surround them.
We know now that if you treat people early, effectively, you can produce good levels of response and, in many cases, a full recovery, assuming that we can convince people to remain in treatment indefinitely.
Edward's commitment to do that is clear.
He has had a lot of help, but he is better because of himself, because he takes his medicine, because he goes to his meetings, because he's working. His life is structured. So a huge part of his success comes from his own willingness to get better.
The same is true for Jasper.
You watch somebody grow up and you sort of see a path that they're on, and then that path gets interrupted. And fortunately, he found his way with wonderful professional help back to a place where he can sort of see what's real in himself.
The only advice I can give is that you can't let it bring you down. You can't like be diagnosed with it and say, there's nothing I can do. It's the end of the world for me. You have to, get back out there and, live your life.
Jasper is so admirable because he is trying every day to live with it and to stay away from what may cause more destruction. He's healing himself. He's healing himself.
If you'd like more information on schizophrenia, you can check out the Mental Health Research Association online at schizophrenia.com. You can also take a look at the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at aacap.org, and their phone number is 202-966-7300. And finally, check out Mental Health America at mentalhealthamerica.net, 800-969-6642. And for many more resources, go to our website, keepingkidshealthy.org. That's all for today. I'm Dr. Winnie King, and I'll see you next time on Keeping Kids Healthy.